Today we're going to look at one of the best ways to make your odd time signatures not sound odd. Pack your lunch, grab your backpack, join me at the Prog School. All right, it's time to talk about odd time signatures again, but this is the Prog School, so get used to it. The focus for today's lesson is on a particular technique to make your odd time signatures groove and feel more natural, and this technique is called overriding. So what is overriding? I first heard this term coined by the great Gavin Harrison of Porcupine Tree fame. If you haven't checked him out, do yourself a favor, he's one of my favorite prog drummers. The basic idea and goal behind overriding is to give your odd time signatures a more steady pulse, thus allowing them to groove and feel a little more accessible. I love crazy messed up rhythms as much as anyone, but making odd time signatures feel natural and groove will allow you to use them in places in your compositions where you might normally avoid them, like choruses or melodic sections, solos, softer sections, main riffs, really any part with a hook of some kind. Let's check out a simple example of this in action. Here's a common 7/8 rhythm. This particular one was the first rhythm in my Odd Meters You Need to Know video. Here it is played in its basic form, with the hi-hat playing eighth notes and accenting the main rhythm. Now this rhythm is great and super useful, but it doesn't groove particularly well. It has kind of an unsettling feeling with the accented beats being uneven. To override this, all I need to do is change the eighth notes in the hi-hat to quarter notes, and we get this. Instantly, this grooves way harder and feels a lot better to me. The bass rhythm is still there, but there's a nice steady pulse from the hi-hat. Notice now that the hi-hat no longer lines up on the downbeat of every measure. It takes 2 measures for it to sync back up. This creates some nice syncopation between the hi-hat and the kick and snare in measure 2, which adds to the grooviness. So that's the basic technique for creating an override, and it's commonly done this way, where you replace an eighth note pulse with a quarter note pulse. Here's this same idea with a 5/8 rhythm. Exact same concept, though on this one I might change the snare placement to this. That feels a little bit better to me on this one, especially with the quarter note pulse. I like to demonstrate overriding in the cymbals. It's the most common place to see overriding because that's where the pulse is usually happening in rock music. It is possible for the override to take place in other instruments, and in my tune for this lesson I've written a few parts where other instruments are handling the override, and I'll make sure to point those out when we get there. Here's one more example, this time in 9/8. One last thing to touch on is having the overriding pulse be something other than a quarter note. You could really use anything. The trick is just knowing where the pulse and the underlying rhythm are going to line up, which involves everyone's favorite subject, math. For example, you could use a half note override, which gives a heavier halftime kind of a feel. Really useful, but be aware that this will take longer for these two rhythms to sync back up. Here's a half note override with that first 7/8 rhythm. One last example here. I could put a dotted quarter note override on the 9/8 rhythm I did earlier. In this case, notice how the override is lining up every single measure. That's because the override is 3 eighth notes long, which divides nicely into 9/8 3 times. This idea won't always work out so well. Here's a dotted quarter note override on the first 7/8 rhythm. Here it takes 3 measures of 7/8 for the override to line back up with the main rhythm. If you want to mess around with more complicated overrides, just be aware you'll need to figure out where to line up these different rhythms. So now that we've gone over the basics of overriding, let's look at how I use this in my piece. This entire tune uses odd time signatures and overriding. And what I wanted to do was show how you could use overriding to make a tune that's only in odd meters still feel catchy and groovy. Before I get into the overriding I used, I want to talk about the form of this tune for a minute. The last couple of Prog School tunes have been roughly based off a pop song form, though with some major alterations. For this tune, I wanted to break away from that, and one good way to do that is to look to other styles of music. For this one, I took a form from classical music called the rondo form. This is a less common classical form than the sonata allegro, concerto, or symphony, but it worked really well for me here. The rondo form is highlighted by continually going back to a main A section. In its simplest form, it goes A section, B section, and back to the A section. You can also add a C section, giving you A, B, A, C, A. And finally, it can be expanded to add another B section. So you get A, B, A, C, A, B, A. And this is the structure I used in my piece. Going back to that main A section so often gives this tune a nice cohesion, but it stays away from the predictability of a pop song form. Traditionally in the rondo form, each section is in a different key, and I thought it would be nice to keep that idea. I took it one step further and put each different section in a different time signature as well. That varied it up even more and allowed me to explore a bunch of different overriding ideas. This tune starts with the A section, which is mostly in the key of E Lydian, giving it a spacey modern prog vibe. This section is in 5/8 with the clean guitar playing the main rhythm. It's 3 measures of a 3-2-5/8 pattern and 1 measure of a 2-3-5/8 pattern. After playing the pattern once, a second clean guitar comes in and plays a quarter note override. As I mentioned earlier, overrides don't have to be in the drums. When the lead guitar and synth enter halfway through the A section, the bass switches to playing the quarter note override to help reinforce it. Then the band kicks in and the A section repeats. When the drums enter, they take over the quarter note override, first in the left foot on the hi-hat and then on the open hi-hat. One thing I tried to do in the A section is to vary it up a bit each time with instrumentation and dynamics. Because it gets repeated 4 times in this tune, I really wanted to keep it fresh each time. The A section also doesn't really have a melody. Instead, it has these fast 16th note runs in the lead guitar and synth. This was another reason it was important to vary it up, because it lacks a really strong melodic hook. It's more about the overall spacey and kind of uplifting vibe of this section. Moving to the B section, I wanted to bring in something that countered the mood of the A section. I bring in a darker atmosphere by moving to the key of F sharp minor and going between an F sharp minor chord and a D minor chord. Here, a more traditional sounding melody plays, once again highlighting that mood change. I also switched the rhythm to 7/8 here. The main rhythm in this first B section is 3 measures of a 2-2-3-7/8 pattern and 1 measure of a 3-2-2-7/8 pattern. The quarter note override continues here in the hi-hat. In the first B section, the underlying rhythm is majorly obscured by these seemingly random rhythms in the kick and guitars, but these rhythms are actually based off this main 7/8 rhythm. This 7/8 rhythm is played in its most basic form the second time the B section happens. What I wanted was for this first B section to feel really chaotic, so when the simpler rhythm happens later on, it feels really straightforward and epic, even though it's still in 7/8. There's a short 5/8 transition back to the A section after this first B section. And this never happens again, but it felt right to me as I was writing, and sometimes you just have to go with what makes sense to you as you're composing. The second A section is really just a full band version of the first A section, with everything playing nice and loud. Now it's on to the C section. This is the longest and most complicated of the themes in this tune. Once again, I wanted a different vibe for this theme, So I put it in 9/8 and I went for a weird kind of fusion funk metal feel. I changed keys again here as well, going to G sharp minor, and I carry over the basic chord progression from the B section, but this time in G sharp minor. So G sharp minor to E minor. One other thing I do here, which I pretty much never do, is bring in some electronic elements. I have electronic drums and bass playing in the beginning of the C section, as well as the beginning of the next A section. I thought it worked really nicely for this rhythm, and once again highlighted that big feel change I was going for between these different sections. Plus, reaching outside of what you normally do instrumentation-wise can spark some new creative ideas, and it definitely did for me on this part. Here's the 9/8 rhythm for this section. It's based on groups of 2, 3, 2, 2. I was going for something a little more syncopated here, and these 16th note figures help with that. When it first kicks in, the electronic bass guitar plays this figure, and the normal bass guitar plays a half note override. The electronic hi-hat plays this figure, but it also catches the half note override. This is the first example of a half note override in this tune, and it helps to emphasize the dynamic drop that happens here. When this pattern repeats, there's more of a full groove in the electronic drums, highlighted by this fairly comical whipping sound. The cross stick on the snare brings back the quarter note override here, and the lead guitar and synth trade the B section melody back and forth. Now it's on to the solo section, which goes a little heavier on the funk feel. I keep the same rhythmic figure, but this time led by a funky clean guitar. During the solo, the quarter note override is kept in the hi-hat. Harmonically, there's an interesting variation on the G sharp minor to E minor chord progression. It goes G sharp minor 9 to G sharp minor 6/9, which is kind of a funky Dorian vamp, and then to E minor 6 and E minor 6/9. Then the upper part of those four chords repeat with new bass notes, C sharp and A instead of G sharp and E. That makes these chords C sharp 11 to C sharp 13, and then A9 to A6/9. It's fun to experiment with different bass notes over the same chords, and it can really change up the harmony a lot. Here it's also used to help further this kind of funk fusion jazz vibe. The C section continues here with this shred guitar keyboard unison. Here the drums give us a dotted quarter note override. As I showed in the intro, this lines up perfectly with the 9/8 rhythm. The dotted quarter note override continues for the rest of the C section. From the unison, we go to another variation on the B section melody that leads us back to the A section. This A section brings back the electronic instruments. The electronic and acoustic kicks both pound out a quarter note override, giving this messed up disco vibe. The hi-hat accents groups of 5 with the rhythm guitars, which creates a neat 4-against-5 polyrhythm. Halfway through this A section, the full band kicks back in with the rock feel of the previous A sections, and then it's on to the last B section. This is where the tune really peaks in intensity. The basic 7/8 rhythm from the B section is played here in the guitars, bass, and drums, with a quarter note override in the cymbal. The harmony returns to the F sharp minor to D minor progression from the B section. One difference here is that in the first B section, the F sharp minor chord is really an F sharp Dorian chord. And here in this last B section, the F sharp minor chord is more of an F sharp Aeolian chord. This allows for there to be a darker Aeolian version of this melody. From here, it's back to the A section one more time. This time I keep the intensity all the way up. I add a melody on top with the guitar and synth, alter the chugging electric guitar rhythms a little bit, and keep the quarter note override going until the band holds a big E major chord. And then the clean guitars and a square synth take the tune out with a variation on the intro. So there's the tune. For me, learning about overriding was one of those light bulb moments when it came to writing progressive music, and that's why I wanted to talk about it earlier on in these Prog School lessons. You're going to hear this technique used in pretty much everything that I write. Hopefully you'll hear how the overriding is able to keep this tune catchy and groovy, even though I never once use a common time signature throughout the whole thing. I'd encourage you to experiment with this idea yourself and see what you can come up with. As always, I'll let the full tune play out at the end of the video. You can follow the link in the description below to pick this up on my Bandcamp. I'll post just the song here on YouTube and it'll be on all your major streaming services, but Bandcamp is the best way to support me directly. If you enjoyed this lesson, like, subscribe, hit the bell notification, and give it a share. It really helps me out. And until next time, stay proggy.